That ghetto rat wants fame? That's what Trump spat 24 hours before filing a $250 million lawsuit against Jasmine Crockett. But he didn't sue over lies. He sued to stop one name from reaching a microphone, Tiana Meredith. 25 years silenced, $4.2 million wired, 99.94% DNA match. Jasmine wasn't chasing the headlines. She was dragging the truth out of its grave. And Trump knew discovery might destroy him. The Capitol sat unnaturally still that morning. Not the kind of stillness that comes with peace, but the kind that coils itself around a secret just before it strikes. Outside, tourists wandered, cameras clicked, and the flag fluttered like any other day. But inside, beneath the marble and mahogany, power was shifting. Quietly, violently, and without warning. No chatter, no leaks, not even a whisper. Just the heavy click of a filing time-stamped 9:00 a.m. sharp. Trump v. Crockett, civil defamation, $250,000. It dropped like a hammer in silence. One designed an end to seek justice, but to crush Jasmine Crockett before she could speak. His legal team delivered it with surgical precision, calculated PR timing, and a courtroom venom sharpened by decades of denial. They expected her to stumble, apologize, settle, or at least shut up. But what they didn't know was that Jasmine had her own weapon, and she'd been waiting, watching, and preparing in silence. She held it now, tucked beneath her arm, disguised as nothing more than a red folder. But in her hands, it felt like a fuse. Inside, sealed affidavits, bank logs, NDAs, and one DNA test with a number that no amount of press strategy could erase. 99.94%. Jasmine stared at the lawsuit once, her fingers tracing the embossed letters like they were written in gasoline. She didn't tremble. She didn't even blink. Then she whispered to herself, barely audible, "He sued before I ever opened my mouth. That's not defense. That's fear." Her aide, nervous and pale, hovered nearby, unsure whether to ask or run. The envelope bearing the Trump legal stamp still sat unopened beside her notes on housing reform. Two completely separate worlds, now colliding in real time. Outside, the press hadn't caught wind. Not yet. Inside, the storm was brewing fast. She walked into the oversight chamber, not like a politician, but like a surgeon walking into a bleeding emergency, calm, clinical, and knowing exactly where to cut. Her heels clicked with a rhythm that didn't shake. She didn't need permission. She had evidence. At her desk, she slid the red folder down slowly. It landed with a dull, soft thud. She didn't open it, not yet. Power, she knew, lived not in shouting, but in timing. 3 seats down, Rep. Jim Jordan leaned in with a smirk painted across his face like smug theater grease. "Everything all right, Congresswoman?" he asked, his tone dipped in sugar and venom. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't even turn. "Perfectly," she said, folding her hands over the sealed lawsuit. Then she looked up toward the committee chair, voice steady, eyes locked. "I'd like to request an adjustment to next Tuesday's hearing." Jordan's brow twitched. "Why Tuesday?" he asked too quickly. She smiled, not warm, not cruel, just final. "Because I'll be triggering discovery." The hum in the chamber didn't stop. It dropped half a pitch, like the sound of oxygen leaving a room. A pause rippled across the bench. Someone on C-SPAN's tech team leaned too close to the mic, catching the faint whisper of a staffer. What did she just say? Jasmine said nothing more. She reached down, lifted the folder, and slid it into her briefcase with the care of someone arming a device. Not for show, for precision. Across town in a gold-trimmed ballroom filled with reflective walls and thicker lies, Trump's team toasted the lawsuit. He adjusted his cufflinks while cameras snapped, grinning like the hunter he believed he still was. "She won't talk," he said under his breath. "She's not built for this kind of war." He had no idea, because while he was sipping champagne under chandeliers, Jasmine was moving 3 floors below the Capitol, into a soundproof room labeled Secure Legal Review Only. No cameras, No phones. Just three people. Representative Ayanna Pressley, Jamie Raskin, and Gloria Allred. She didn't waste time. She dropped the lawsuit on the table and said two words. It's time. Gloria didn't blink. She reached into her own bag and produced a sealed red file thicker than a legal Bible. Across the cover, Meredith v. Trump, GIC 2214. Ayanna leaned forward, slow, deliberate. He really filed this? Before you even spoke? Jasmine nodded. He gave us what we needed, access. Jaime exhaled sharply. Then let's go to war. Gloria peeled back the red seal. Inside, the DNA match, the NDAs, and the wire transfer logs showing exactly $4.2 million routed through TML Strategic Holdings to a woman in Decatur, Georgia. The memo? Education Trust. Private. There was no custody case, no public hearing, just silence. Purchased, enforced, hidden. Jasmine slid a second envelope from her purse, aged at the corners, marked in shaky black pen, to Congresswoman Crockett, private. She opened it again, even though she knew every word by heart. It began simply, I know you don't know me, but I know him. I've known him all my life, even if he never once said my name. That name now visible on a page, on a wire transfer, on a sealed report. Tiana Meredith, the girl they tried to erase, the daughter they paid to keep forgotten, the truth they sealed in cash and shame. And Jasmine, she wasn't holding that folder anymore. She was holding the match, because now discovery had been triggered. And what began as a lawsuit was about to become something far more dangerous. A reckoning, buried inside sealed court filings, was a name no one dared to say aloud in 25 years. Not in courtrooms, not in family meetings, not even in whispers. Tiana Meredith, not a public figure, not a tabloid scandal, just a girl who existed only in fragments. One blurred photo, one wire transfer, one birth certificate with the father's line left blank. But her blood told a louder story, and Jasmine had the evidence. A DNA report from Atlanta Medical, 99.94% probability. Trump's blood didn't just match, it sang. But that truth hadn't been accepted. It had been bought, smothered, and buried. Jasmine opened the red folder again, hands calm but heart pounding. Inside were contracts signed with silence, threats dressed in legalese, and a small, delicate photo paper-clipped it to the back. The girl in the image couldn't have been more than 10, brown skin, sharp jaw, hazel eyes. And there, beside her, half-turned but unmistakable, was Donald J. Trump, smiling like the moment meant nothing. It probably didn't, but to the girl, that one photo was the only proof she'd ever had that he once looked at her. The silence around Tiana wasn't just legal, it was designed. Jasmine traced her finger along the edge of the second envelope, the one Tiana had sent nearly 2 years ago. She'd kept it hidden, not because she didn't believe it, but because she knew what it would cost to make it matter. The letter inside was written in slanted, uneven script, folded twice, signed simply TM. I know you don't know me, but I know him. I've known him all my life, even if he never once said my name. That sentence echoed like a gunshot inside Jasmine's chest. Across the table, Gloria Allred flipping through the NDAs, 3 total. All airtight, one belonged to Maria Meredith, Tiana's mother, a woman who, for the price of $4.2 million, signed away her daughter's right to be recognized, not to survive, but to disappear. The terms were vicious. No public mention, no written confirmation, no press, no acknowledgement. Violation voids the full payment and triggers legal forfeiture. They hadn't written a contract. They'd written an erasure. Ayanna Pressley stared at the wire transfer log. This shell company, TML Strategic Holdings, wasn't just created to move money. It was created to erase evidence, she said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut stone. But even buried evidence leaves trails. Jasmine turned to Jaime Raskin, who had already begun cross-referencing the payment date with federal travel logs. March 14th, 2018, day after the wire hit, he muttered, flipping through a folder. Melania flew to Palm Beach the next morning on a government jet. Coincidence? Ayanna asked. Not if you read what came with it, Gloria said, holding up a photo. A bracelet, gold, thin, custom engraved, to the girl you'll never know. That wasn't a coincidence. That was an apology. Signed it not in ink, but in jewelry. And here's where the cracks began to spread. Not in legal filings, but in humanity. Jasmine sat in silence, staring at the signature at the bottom of the NDA. Donald J. Trump, witnessed and initialed by Melania Trump, the First Lady. The woman whose name had stood beside policy speeches and photo ops, now sitting quietly on a document that erased a child. But even a buried signature can rot through marble if you press hard enough. Tiana never wanted revenge, Jasmine said finally. She just wanted her name back. And that was what made this case dangerous. Not the dollar amount, not the politics, but the fact that this wasn't about power, it was about identity. Trump had spent decades branding himself, building monuments, buying loyalty, crushing dissent. But he hadn't just denied a scandal. He denied a child. And now that child had a folder full of receipts and a congresswoman willing to set it all on fire. Jasmine stood up, paced once, then opened the final page of the file. The updated birth certificate, Georgia State, official seal, father, Donald John Trump, filed quietly, postmarked February, stamped by a registrar now under federal whistleblower protection. This wasn't hearsay. This wasn't rumor. This was a legal truth waiting to become a national wound. She never even wanted to testify, Jasmine said softly. She begged me not to make her public. But when she saw he was suing to silence me, she said, if he's coming for you, I'm done hiding. Gloria nodded. She's not just a witness. She's the trigger. The room fell quiet. The weight of history, not political, but personal, settled into the corners like dust that had waited too long to move. Jasmine closed the folder slowly, clicking it shut like a vault. For a moment, she just stood there breathing. Then she looked at Ayanna, voice low and final. They tried to erase her, but now she's going to make history instead. Ayanna didn't smile. She didn't blink. She simply leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Jasmine's with that quiet, thunderous intensity only survivors carry. You know what happens when Black women tell inconvenient truths in rooms built by men who lie? Her voice wasn't bitter. It was calibrated like someone who had seen the system's insides and memorized its weaknesses. Jasmine nodded, not as a politician, but as a woman who had tasted that truth firsthand. Then let's knock the room down. There was no applause, no firebrand energy, just the terrifying calm that comes when a line has been crossed and there's no going back. Chaimee Raskin looked between them, recognizing the shift. Not just legal strategy, resistance, not performance, reckoning. He closed his own folder with a T. Then we'll need precision. No leaks, no theatrics. We go in like surgeons, not soldiers. But Ayanna shook her head slowly. No, she said. We go in like mothers, because what they stole wasn't a narrative. It was a child. Jasmine exhaled, her fingers tapping once on the sealed red folder that now felt less like paper and more like dynamite. They're already rewriting the narrative, she said. Fox is spinning it like I fabricated the daughter, that I'm weaponizing identity to smear him before the election. One anchor called me an ambitious congresswoman with a vendetta. She scoffed, voice lined with steel. As if ambition's a sin, as if telling the truth is. Ayanna rose slowly and walked toward the window. Outside, the Capitol gleamed under soft morning light. Too perfect, too clean. She stared for a long moment, then spoke so softly Jasmine almost missed it. This building wasn't made for us. We were meant to polish its floors, not speak in its chambers. The moment we open our mouths, they hear thunder. She turned back. So if you speak, Jasmine, if you really speak, don't whisper. Don't trim the truth to make it more palatable. Don't hand it to them in a suit and tie and hope they treat it gently. Drop it like a verdict, like a hammer. Jasmine nodded once, slowly. She wasn't new to battles, but this one didn't feel like a campaign or a policy war. It felt like blood, like legacy, like ancestry roaring through the bones of the present. Gloria Allred was already making calls, her voice clipped and exact. We'll need chain of custody protocols on the birth certificate, whistleblower protection for the state registrar in Georgia. If Melania's signature is verified on that NDA, she'll be brought in. But quietly, one slip, and this becomes political theater instead of judicial rupture. Jaime added, Tiana needs security, now. If the media catches wind before we're ready, they'll burn her before she even sits down. Already done, Jasmine said, tapping her phone. She's staying with someone in Baltimore. No press, no contact. Her number's off grid. She doesn't even know half of what we've uncovered yet. She thinks she's just helping me defend a lawsuit. She has no idea how much power her story actually holds. She'll need to know, Ayanna said firmly. Before this goes public, she has to understand that when you tell the truth in America, especially a Black truth, you don't just speak, you inherit enemies. Jasmine bit her lower lip. She's not built for this kind of fire. Ayanna stepped closer. Then we build a shield around her. We build it with truth and rage and law and ancestors. The moment thickened. There was something ancient about it, as if these four people, 3 lawmakers and a lawyer, had unknowingly stepped into a role much older than Congress or cable news, protectors of a truth the world had tried too hard to bury. Jasmine finally sat again, shoulders rolled back, eyes locked forward. What's the sequence, she asked. Jaime answered, flipping his legal palm. 3 stages. 1, Jasmine testifies under congressional privilege. 2, Tiana gives 5 minutes of live civilian testimony. 3, we submit the sealed exhibits directly to DRA. No redactions, no gag orders, full exposure. And Trump? Gloria asked. Ayanna answered for everyone. He'll show up, he'll bark, he'll bluster, but this time he won't be able to lie fast enough to outrun her face. For a moment they sat in silence, heavy but electric. Tiana's photo rested between them. Not framed, just folded, but it might as well have been a mirror. Because what they were defending wasn't just a girl, it was every truth silenced for being inconvenient. Every woman told she imagined it. Every child erased by ink and silence. Ayanna looked at Jasmine one last time. If you speak next week, the whole world will hear her name. Jasmine reached for the folder again, slid it into her briefcase, and clicked the lock. Good, she said. It's time they did. It began, as so many Trump storms did, under golden lights in glittering ceilings. He stood at the center of the Mar-a-Lago ballroom like a ringmaster in a circus, only he believed was still selling tickets. Cameras blinked. Staffers held their breath. Teleprompters gleamed. There is no daughter, he said, teeth clenched in a smile too polished to be calm. No scandal, just slander. The flags behind him swayed slightly, caught it in the breeze of carefully timed air conditioning. His voice, low and theatrical, carried the cadence of practiced outrage. It wasn't law he was invoking. It was a narrative. Victimhood disguised as strength. Fury sharpened by ego. Flanked by lawyers in tailored suits and dead eyes, he moved like a man who had rehearsed the dance 1,000 times. One lawyer held a folder labeled Crockett Disinformation Briefing. Another clutched notes marked with cable news talking points. Unhinged progressive. Radical. Desperate for attention. Trump's eyes scanned the crowd with clinical precision, landing briefly on each camera, each microphone, each perfectly positioned lens. She's making up stories, fabricated claims, attacking my family to get headlines. He paused, just long enough for gasps to be captured. This isn't about truth, it's about power. And yet, no one asked the obvious question. If there was no daughter, why did he sue before she ever spoke? Back in D.C., Jasmine watched the press conference on mute, eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. The volume didn't matter. The choreography was familiar. Denial wasn't new, neither was performance. But this time she wasn't playing a part. She was preparing a counterstrike. While Trump wielded microphones and marble backdrops, Jasmine sat beneath the Capitol dome in a private war room. Dim light, paper trails, and silent allies. No stage, no crowd, just strategy. Katie Porter had joined the core team now, flipping through color-coded timelines with forensic intensity. Red was for wire transfers, yellow for legal threats, blue for sealed court records, black for deaths, of names, of voices, of reputations too fragile to survive truth. His team's already flooding social, Katie said. They're seeding hashtags. Hashtag fabricated daughter, hashtag deep state hoax, hash Crockett collapse. Let them, Jasmine replied, unbothered. They're pushing noise. We're holding the signal. Ayanna chimed in, voice razor sharp. His press conference wasn't about denying the claim. It was about setting the stage, making Jasmine look like the aggressor. Because if a black woman raises her voice, they call it an attack. Gloria nodded grimly. He's baiting her into overplaying. One misstep, and it becomes her scandal instead of his exposure. But Jasmine wasn't biting. She knew the trap. She'd seen it play out in headlines her whole career. Emotional black woman, hysterical radical, liar, opportunist. She also knew that spectacle was Trump's armor. He wrapped himself in it like a king draped in invisibility, because as long as the crowd watched the fire, they wouldn't notice the ashes beneath his throne. But this time, the ashes had a name. Tiana Meredith. Not a rumor, not a headline. A woman with a face, a letter, and a photo signed by the man who now claimed he'd never seen her. And the world was about to meet her. The Oversight Committee calendar had been rearranged, quietly, strategically. Tuesday now bore a simple label: special session, closed testimony preparation. Jasmine's name was on the docket, no fanfare, no leaks. But inside the chamber, the tension was crackling. Reporters didn't know what was coming, but they knew something was coming. Hallway whispers, elevator silences, aides walking faster than usual. One Politico correspondent tweeted, "Unusual energy around Capitol hearings next week. Rumors swirling, something big coming." Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't confirm. She didn't deny. She just prepared. She met with legal staff, reviewed every document, practiced delivery not like a performance, but like a surgeon rehearsing an incision. Calm, calculated, controlled. Trump shouted in ballrooms. Jasmine sharpened in silence. And as Friday drew to a close, Trump gave one final flourish to his theater. "Let me be clear," he said into every camera that would take him. "This is a witch hunt. I've never heard that name. Tiana Meredith. I've never met her, never seen her. And if she appears, it'll be fake, manufactured, just like everything else they throw at me. But the thing about truth, it doesn't need applause. It only needs a microphone and a name. And in 5 days, Jasmine Crockett was going to give it both." Tuesday morning broke like any other in Washington, D.C., humid, rehearsed, and unaware of its own pending rupture. The Capitol bustled with routine. Aides pacing with lattes, security checking badges, journalists waiting for crumbs outside sealed doors. But inside room 311 of the Oversight Committee, something very different was stirring. Not debate, not policy. Consequence. Jasmine Crockett stepped into the chamber at 8:52 a.m., exactly 8 minutes before gavel. She wore navy, not for drama, but defiance, and carried a red leather briefcase, weathered at the edges, locked tight. The room noticed. They didn't know why, but they noticed. Every seat was full. Chairs had been added along the back wall. Committee members sat straighter than usual. A few aides whispered, even the most cynical among them, those who had seen every scandal, every hearing, every televised collapse, leaned forward. Because something in the air was different today. It wasn't noise. It was weight. C-SPAN's red recording light blinked alive. Microphones warmed beneath the hot breath of history waiting to exhale. Across the aisle, Representative Jim Jordan smirked into his lap, flipping through a pre-scripted response packet entitled, character assassination, and political stunts. It wouldn't survive 10 minutes. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Chairwoman Dotto struck the gavel once. Clear, sharp, final. We are now in session. Congresswoman Crockett, you have the floor. Jasmine didn't stand right away. She placed the red folder gently on the desk, centered it, then pressed both palms to either side. When she did rise, it was not fast. It was deliberate, like someone who understood the gravity of what she was about to drop. Her voice was steady. Her words were not prepared. They were engraved. This folder contains the story of a child paid to disappear. And today, she paused, her eyes sweeping the room, resting momentarily on each skeptical face, each downturned glance, each smug expression cracking. She walks in. Even Trump's allies blinked. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. Jim Jordan shifted. Katie Porter narrowed her eyes, pen in hand. Jamie Raskin leaned forward, sensing the ignition. Jasmine opened the folder like a surgeon making her first incision. Controlled, methodical, and knowing exactly where to cut. The first page was held up, projected across the chamber screen. A notarized DNA test. Black ink. 99.94%. A name, Tiana Meredith. A second, Donald John Trump. Gasps weren't audible, but they were present. You could feel them in the way backs straightened, in the way silence grew tense, in the way note-taking suddenly stopped. This is not speculation, Jasmine said. This is science. This is state-certified. This is blood. She flipped to the next page. A wire transfer log dated March 14, 2018, from TML Strategic Holdings, LLC, a known shell company tied to the Trump organization. The amount? $4.2 million. The recipient? Maria Meredith. Memo line, education support. Jasmine paused there, not to catch her breath, but to let them catch up. Because the numbers weren't just numbers anymore. They were proof of a cover-up, a purchase order for a human life, an invoice for silence. He didn't deny her with words, she said softly. He denied her with money. The next document was the NDA, signed by Maria Meredith, legally airtight, legally cruel. But what made the room finally shift, what pulled the last breath out of denial, was the final line at the bottom of the page. Witnessed by Melania K. Trump. It didn't matter if they gasped. The document gasped for them. Chairwoman Dotto blinked. Jamie Raskin adjusted his tie, not because it needed straightening, but because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. One Republican aide dropped a pen. Another whispered, "This isn't theater, this is fire." And Jasmine kept going. She held up a scanned image of a gold bracelet. Projected behind her was a photo, small, delicate, engraved with tiny letters. To the girl you'll never know. She didn't explain it. She didn't have to. The room was already sinking under the weight of meaning. Regret had a clasp. Denial had an accessory. But the final reveal was not a document, not a wire transfer. It was a photograph. Jasmine placed it on the projector, slowly, like lowering a flag. It showed Trump, dressed in golf casual, standing at the Mar-a-Lago bar with his hand resting on the shoulder of the girl no one had ever seen before. She was 10, maybe 11. Brown eyes, hazel flecks, curly hair, standing too straight for someone her age. Her smile was unsure. His was careless. On the back of the photo, handwritten ink. To my friend's daughter, stay strong, DJT. Trump's defenders froze, not because they believed it yet, but because they had no immediate lie strong enough to kill it. Jasmine lowered the image and looked directly into the lens of the main chamber camera. She didn't ask to be born. He asked her to disappear. And now, with the truth unsealed, it wasn't Jasmine on trial. It was the lie. And her briefcase wasn't holding papers. It was holding the match that would burn the theater down. The doors opened with no announcement, no music, no procession, just the metallic groan of hinges that had stayed silent for too long. At first, no one stood. There was no reason to, not yet. Just a young woman entering a room where she never belonged but had always haunted. Tiana Meredith walked in with nothing but a folded letter in her hand. No lawyers, no press team, no sunglasses to shield her. She didn't wear the armor they expected. She wore a simple black blazer, buttoned to the throat, a white blouse underneath, and a look that was half stone, half storm. The room didn't gasp, it held its breath. Not because of what she was, because of what she represented. For 25 years, she had lived in the footnotes of someone else's legacy, denied, forgotten, bought off, but now the footnote had become the headline, and she was stepping into it without permission. She didn't look left or right as she crossed the chamber, didn't search for friendly faces or flinch under the stairs. Her eyes were fixed on the witness chair like it was a throne that had been stolen from her. And today, for the first time, she was reclaiming it. Jasmine stood silently as Tiana approached, her hand gently brushing the table where the red folder still lay. No words passed between them, but something did. An unspoken handoff of courage, threaded through generations of silenced daughters. Tiana sat, not tentatively, not apologetically. She sat like she had waited all her life to be seen, and now she refused to disappear. Chairwoman Dotto cleared her throat. "Ms. Meredith, are you prepared to give testimony under oath?" Tiana nodded once sharply. "I am." The oath was short, the silence afterward, infinite. She held up the folded letter in both hands. It shook just slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back everything she had once been told to bury. Then she opened it and began to read. "Dear Mr. Trump," she said, her voice quiet but deliberate, "you won't remember me, but I remember you." Every camera in the room clicked into stillness. Journalists froze, pens suspended. Even the opposition held back their next talking point. I was 12, it was winter. My mother told the hotel staff we were visiting her business partner. You walked by, looked me in the face, and said, "She's got my nose." She swallowed. Her hands tightened on the letter. You smiled. I cried, because I already knew what she hadn't said out loud. That you were my father, and you said it like a joke. Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment. The room was still as glass. Tiana didn't blink. She continued, "You didn't touch me. You didn't acknowledge me. You just kept walking. And I thought that maybe if I was better, prettier, quieter, you'd say something else the next time." She looked up, eyes sweeping the chamber. But there was no next time. Her voice didn't shake. It cut. Instead, I got silence. Instead, I got lawyers. I got settlements my mother never explained and school tuition that just appeared. And when I asked about you, she cried. Not because she was ashamed of me, because she wasn't allowed to say your name. She unfolded the second page of the letter. "This isn't about money. This is about identity. You made me a secret. Then you sued the only person brave enough to say I was real." She looked directly at the members seated before her voice now steady and cold. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because my birth was treated like a scandal. Because my existence was redacted. Because I was traded for quiet." Someone coughed near the back. A reporter whispered, "Jesus Christ." And then she said the sentence that would be replayed 100,000 times before midnight. "He doesn't have to say I'm his daughter." She held up the DNA report, trembling slightly in her grip. His money already did. The air cracked like ice beneath floodlights. Jasmine glanced toward the Republican side of the bench. No one moved. Jim Jordan's pen was still in his hand, but he hadn't written a word in minutes. Tiana lowered the letter. "I wrote this when I was 18. I never sent it. I didn't think anyone would care. I thought if I told the world who I was, they'd laugh or call me a liar. But today, I'm not asking to be believed. I'm demanding to be acknowledged." She placed the letter on the table. Then slowly, carefully, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a single photo. She slid it toward the chairwoman, who passed it to the clerk. The image appeared on the chamber screen. Tiana, age 12, standing on a marble staircase. Behind her, slightly blurred but unmistakable, Donald J. Trump, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. And for the first time, the room exhaled, not in disbelief, but in confirmation. Tiana leaned forward slightly, voice barely above a whisper. I existed, even when they paid not to. And with that, she folded her hands in her lap and sat still in the silence that followed. Not as a scandal, not as an accusation, but as proof. The chamber did not clap. It did not speak. It simply absorbed, the way a wound does when pressure is finally removed. Chairwoman Dotto shifted in her seat. Her fingers drummed once, then stopped. Miss Crockett, she said softly, you indicated one final civilian witness. Is that person present? Jasmine rose slowly. She didn't rush. This wasn't theater. It was testimony, and every second deserved to land. Yes, Madam Chair, she said, glancing toward the chamber doors. Her name is Marta Raldi. She served as a personal stylist to the First Lady. At that, even the Republican side twitched. Not because they knew the name, but because they knew what it implied. Marta wasn't just a stylist. She was inside. She had been in rooms no press had ever entered. Her hands had zipped designer gowns for state dinners. Her eyes had seen whispered breakdowns the media never caught. And now she was here, not to decorate, but to dismantle. The doors opened again. Marta stepped in, tall, poised, dressed in black with silver at her temples. She didn't walk like a politician. She didn't need to. She walked like someone who had nothing left to protect and everything left to tell. She took her seat beside the clerk, swore her oath with a voice that didn't shake, and opened the velvet box in front of her. Inside, cradled like a relic, lay a bracelet, not flashy, not gaudy, delicate, intentional, deadly. Marta lifted it with gloved fingers and held it up. The chamber camera zoomed, broadcasting the inscription across the projection screen like a quiet scream. Forgive us. Gasps this time were real, audible, even controlled. Marta blinked once, her voice calm but trembling at the edges. I was with the First Lady on May 12, 2020, she began. She'd requested a review of accessories for a gala appearance, but she didn't care about earrings. She didn't even try on shoes. She kept holding this. She nodded toward the bracelet. I'd never seen it before. It wasn't part of her collection. She said it was a private piece, a gift she never gave. Jasmine leaned forward. Who was it for? Marta looked directly at her. She didn't say, but I asked why it said us. Why plural? There was a pause, then Marta's voice cracked, just barely. She looked at me and whispered, because he wasn't the only one who knew. You could hear a paper clip fall on marble. Marta swallowed. Later that day, I saw her sign a folder. It had legal tabs. It was left on the table by a man I didn't recognize. One of his. She didn't ask questions. She didn't read it. She just signed. Jasmine stepped forward. Did you see what was on the folder? Marta nodded. It said NDA. The name on the corner was Meredith. That broke something. Not in the structure of the room, but in the faces. On the GOP bench, two aides glanced at each other, eyes wide. One staffer looked down at his tablet and quietly turned it off. Jasmine walked to the exhibit table and opened a secondary folder. She pulled out the notarized NDA, the one already shown to the chamber, but this time she zoomed in on the bottom corner. Two initials in blue ink. MT. Jasmine turned toward the room. These were hers, Melania Trump, not just complicit, present, initialing the deal that erased a child. The chamber shifted again, but this time not with noise, with recognition. Marta wasn't finished. She cried, she said, her voice smaller now. After she signed it, she didn't wipe the tears. She didn't ask me to leave. She just whispered, it's done. Chairwoman Daldo leaned forward, whispering something to the clerk. Tiana, still seated, didn't speak. She didn't move, but her eyes watched Marta like a girl watching a door finally crack open. Jasmine closed the folder. What this witness confirms is that this wasn't a decision made in isolation. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy, with signatures, with silence, and with jewelry meant to replace justice. She turned toward Marta. Why bring the bracelet? Marta looked at Tiana. Because it never belonged to Melania, she said. She made it for her. She placed the bracelet gently on the table between them and stood up. Her testimony was done, but her guilt, it lingered. Even as she exited the chamber, heads stayed turned, watching her, not like a hero, not like a villain, but like someone who had finally stopped hiding her part in the crime. And as the doors closed behind her, Jasmine picked up the bracelet, held it for a moment, then said to no one in particular, even the ones who cry still sign. Silence had thickened to the point of suffocation. It wasn't just the kind of quiet that follows a heavy truth. It was the quiet before impact, when everyone senses something irreversible is about to happen, but no one knows which way the shrapnel will fly. And then Jasmine spoke again. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture. She simply tapped the red folder once, opened it slowly, and pulled out a single photo. She walked to the projector station without ceremony and placed the image face down on the glass. The screen flickered for a moment, then stabilized. The entire chamber shifted. Donald J. Trump, standing on the marble mezzanine at Mar-a-Lago, casual slacks, collared shirt, drink in one hand, his other arm draped, lightly, unmistakably, around the shoulders of a young girl. The girl was around 11. Hazel eyes, curly hair pulled back, a smile too small, a posture too careful. Tiana Meredith. She wasn't labeled. She didn't need to be. Every line in her face screamed lineage. There was no defense, no spin, no distance, until Trump barked from the bench, "That's Photoshop!" The voice snapped like a whip across the chamber, startling even his own counsel. He shot to his feet, pointing at the screen, face flushed beneath foundation and fury. "That's not real. That's fake. That's—" Jasmine didn't even flinch. She turned to face him, her tone smooth and surgical. "Then why does it match the metadata in your resort's server?" Gasps followed, not theatrical, but instinctive. Chairs creaked, reporters dropped pens. You could hear the breath of the nation freeze through the red light of the C-SPAN camera. Katie Porter raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. "She's got metadata," she muttered to Raskin. He nodded once. "She's got everything." Jasmine clicked a remote. The next slide appeared. A screen of raw metadata. File name. Creation timestamp. Geotagging. Internal server ID. MLCCTV 0122. Origin Mar-a-Lago private event folder. Dated January 3rd, 2011. She didn't need to explain. The data explained itself. Jasmine returned to the center of the room and spoke not to Trump, not to the chair, but to the record. This photo was submitted by a former Mar-a-Lago staffer under federal whistleblower protections. It was pulled from the internal archives, the very archive the Trump organization tried to wipe before its last asset audit. She flipped the photo over in her hands. The screen followed. Written on the back, in heavy slanted script, "To my friend's daughter, stay strong, DJT." A beat of pure stillness followed. Then Trump slammed his fist against the desk. "I take thousands of pictures with people. That could be anyone." But no one echoed him. Not his lawyers, not his aides, not even Jim Jordan. Because in that moment, the line between anyone and someone collapsed. Jasmine didn't turn toward him. She just spoke. "You called her the daughter of a friend, but never said his name. And now that she's standing here, you say she's no one." She lifted the photo again, not to weaponize it, but to remind the room what had been denied. This wasn't a selfie, it wasn't a handshake. This was a moment captured, stored, signed, and buried. Tiana hadn't moved since the image was displayed. Her hands remained folded in her lap, but her shoulders had straightened. Her mouth, tight as a clenched door, slowly relaxed. Because that photo, now projected 6 feet tall behind her, had said what she'd been told no one would ever believe. You were there, you mattered. They knew. Jasmine turned toward the chair. Let the record reflect that this image, authenticated by internal resort logs and supported by whistleblower metadata, places Donald Trump in physical proximity to Tiana Meredith at a private event in 2011. Let it reflect that he wrote her name, that he signed it. Dodo nodded slowly, not as chair, but as witness. Trump sat back, his jaw tight. His team shuffled papers in silence. A desperation not to strategize, but to delay collapse. Because now it wasn't just allegations. It wasn't even blood. It was a picture. A child next to a man who had spent millions trying to say she didn't exist. And it was signed. Jasmine returned to her seat, not triumphant, just resolute. Because she knew this wasn't the explosion. This was the aftershock. The moment when even lies look at themselves in the mirror and blink. The photo still glowed on the screen like a wound no one could clean. Trump sat stiff in his chair, lips pursed, a single vein twitching in his temple. His attorneys whispered urgently into his ears, but he didn't seem to hear them. He kept staring at the image, as if staring long enough might unwrite it. But the reckoning wasn't done. Jasmine reached once more into the red folder. This time her movements were slower, heavier. Not from hesitation, but from reverence. What she pulled out was not dramatic, not thick, just one page, one thin, cream-colored, state-issued page that had the power to end 40 years of avoidance in 4 printed lines. She rose but didn't walk to the center. She didn't need the stage anymore. The truth had taken it. She lifted the document high enough for the camera to see. This, she began, voice low but unshakable, is not an opinion. This is not speculation. This is not media spin or testimony or even personal memory. She turned the page slowly toward the chamber. This is state-recorded fact. A copy of Tiana Meredith's amended birth certificate, issued and notarized by the Georgia Department of Public Health, appeared on the overhead screen. Date of birth, August 14, 1998. Place of birth, Decatur, Georgia. Mother, Maria Meredith. Father, Donald John Trump, stamped, signed, verified. The state seal pressed deep into the bottom corner. The registrar's signature dated just 4 months earlier. Accompanying it, a footnote referencing genetic confirmation and legal admission under sealed records. Jasmine let the silence stretch. Then she read the name, out loud, slowly. Donald John Trump. And that was the moment. Trump's mouth opened, but this time no words came out. Not a denial, not a distraction, just air. Stuck between the truth and the wall he could no longer build fast enough to hide behind. He turned to one of his lawyers, but the man just stared at the screen like it was a tombstone. Another leaned in, whispered something, and was met with nothing but a shallow nod. Because what was there to say? Even lies have expiration dates, and this one had just been state certified. Chairwoman Dotto cleared her throat. Her voice was softer now, almost fragile. Let the record reflect that the Oversight Committee has reviewed and accepted the verified birth certificate. The document has been cross-checked with official Georgia state records and submitted under seal last week. One of the junior members, barely 30, new to Washington, looked pale. I didn't know they could amend a birth certificate 25 years later, he whispered to a colleague. They can, the other replied, but only if they're right. Tiana still hadn't moved. Her eyes, fixed on the screen, didn't water. She didn't need tears. She had something more powerful now, legal acknowledgement. The kind no NDA could undo, the kind that didn't whisper or imply or accuse. It simply existed. And in doing so, so did she. Jasmine returned to the mic. Her voice dipped an octave, not for drama, but for weight. This was not voluntary. This was not political. This was the state of Georgia confirming, under penalty of perjury, that Tiana Meredith's father is the former president of the United States. She let that settle, which means every denial made since this certificate was signed was a lie. Every attack on her credibility, a deflection. Every dollar spent to silence her, a confession. Across the room, even some on the Republican bench had gone still. One congressman, once loud in his defense of Trump, now sat with his hands clasped, his eyes trained not on Jasmine but on the document, as if it had quietly shifted gravity beneath his feet. Trump finally leaned into the mic. It crackled once. Then, forgery, he muttered. Deep state forgery. But it didn't land, because no one believed him anymore. Not after the DNA, not after the photo, not after Melania's initials, and now not after Georgia stamped her name beside his. Chairwoman Dotto lifted her gavel halfway, then paused. Before she could speak, Tiana herself rose. Slow, calm, barely breathing. She looked at the birth certificate, then at the bracelet still lying on the table, then at Jasmine. "So I exist now?" she asked. Jasmine nodded. "You always did, but now the system does too." And with that, the room seemed to shift, not with sound but with something deeper. Recognition. It was over. Not the fight, not the fallout, but the denial. That had just died. The minute Jasmine closed the red folder for the last time, the noise didn't start inside the chamber. It started outside. A tremor first, then a roar. Through the thick Capitol windows came the sound of voices, hundreds of them, layered and colliding like waves against marble steps. What had started as a sidewalk press gathering had swelled into a full-throated eruption of rage, validation, confusion, in history clawing its way to the surface. Protesters screamed Tiana's name. Some cried, others chanted. Signs waved above a sea of limbs, trembling in the August heat. Sharpies on cardboard, printouts of the photo Jasmine had just shown. A few had the word daughter scrawled in black across their shirts, taped over their chests like truth worn as armor. Across the barrier, red caps clashed with truth signs. One man in a MAGA hoodie waved a speaker above his head, looping the old clip of Trump's voice. "I don't know her. I don't know her. I don't know her." But the crowd answered back, louder from every side of the plaza. "We know her. We see her. Her name is Tiana." It wasn't a protest anymore. It was a reckoning in real time. The line of Capitol Police swelled, shoulders tensed, forming a shaky buffer between those trying to erase and those refusing to forget. News vans double-parked along Constitution Avenue. Drones circled like metal vultures. Social media lit up in every direction. #she exists, I am Tiana, #truth stamped in ink. CNN interrupted regular programming. MSNBC went wall to wall. Even Fox couldn't ignore it now, cutting live to the overhead shot of the steps, where hundreds had become thousands and silence had become thunder. Jasmine emerged first. She didn't raise a fist. She didn't raise her voice. She just walked out holding the red folder, not like a weapon anymore, but like a flag. And beside her, step for step, was Tiana. No sunglasses, no statement outfit. Just a woman wearing her own name for the first time in public and daring the world to look away. The press surged, but the crowd swallowed it. Microphones were shoved forward. Questions flew like arrows. Are you pressing charges? Is Trump going to respond? Why now? Tiana paused at the base of the steps. For a moment, she simply stood there, blinking against the sun. Then she spoke. No podium, no pre-written notes. Just a voice that had once been buried under money and now rose louder than any press release. "I was never invisible." Her voice didn't shake. "I was erased." The plaza froze. Even the other side, though still shouting about deep state and hoaxes and loyalty, paused. Because there was something undeniable in the tone. It wasn't anger. It wasn't politics. It was truth too exhausted to lie anymore. He didn't just silence me. He sued the only woman who spoke my name out loud. Tiana looked at Jasmine. She stood up for me before I could stand up for myself. Jasmine stepped forward then. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "We didn't come out here for applause." She raised the red folder once more. "We came because every name they try to bury deserves a resurrection. And every lie stamped with power deserves a record that fights back." Someone in the crowd yelled, "Say her name!" And the crowd answered, Tiana, Meredith, a young girl, maybe 13, pushed through the crowd and ran to the foot of the steps, holding a handmade sign. They erased you, but we remember. Tiana's breath caught just for a moment, but she didn't cry. Not yet. A grandmother nearby clutched a small American flag to her chest and whispered to no one, I lived through Emmett, through Anita, through Sandra, but today, this girl just made the world look. The sound grew. It wasn't just protest anymore. It was testimony. Behind the barricades, even some officers lowered their gaze, because in moments like this, uniform doesn't protect from truth. It just makes you feel the weight of it more deeply. Jasmine turned back toward the Capitol, toward the building that had never expected to host this kind of history on its steps. They told us she didn't exist. She pointed to the building behind her. Now she's stamped into its record. And this time, there's no backspace. By the time midnight touched D.C., it was clear the silence had shifted. News networks refused to cut to commercial. Clips of Tiana's testimony flooded every feed. Editorials dropped online before their writers could finish typing. In Philadelphia, candles were being lit beneath murals. In Ono and Oakland, girls wrote the name Tiana in chalk outside courthouses. A heartbeat was turning into a pulse into a movement. And that's when the desperation set in. At 4:27 a.m., Trump's legal team filed an emergency motion in federal court. Suppress the oversight hearing footage. Seal the birth certificate. Remove the metadata. Gag Jasmine Crockett. Permanently delete Tiana's name from the congressional record. The motion came without apology. It claimed potential reputational damage, unverified identity, abuse of political process. But behind the lawyer speak, the intent was bare and brutal. Reverse visibility, erase recognition, unname the girl. CNN broke the story at 6:15 a.m. MSNBC followed at 6:17. By 6:23, Jasmine Crockett was standing back outside the Capitol. No podium, no staffers, no press kit. Just her, a single mic, in the same red folder. She held it like it weighed the same as every story that had ever been buried under law. This is not about justice, she said flatly. This is about erasure. There was no applause. There didn't need to be. The country was listening now. He doesn't want due process. He wants disappearance. He wants the file gone, the photo gone, the name gone. He wants to rewrite history before it can be remembered. She tapped the red folder once. But truth leaves fingerprints, and this time it left a paper trail. Inside the Department of Justice, chaos simmered. Staffers debated whether to even respond. Suppressing a congressional record was no small ask, even under pressure from someone who once held the nuclear codes. But the motion had been filed, and once a motion exists, it breathes. The hashtag exploded. Had he wants erasure, junction of shame, you can't delete. Her Trump himself released a statement through his press secretary by 8:03 a.m. This is harassment, not justice. This young woman, who I do not know, is being used as a political pawn by radical Democrats. Shameful, dangerous, possibly criminal. But the country had heard that tune before. And this time the notes didn't land. Because now there was a photo. Now there was a birth certificate. Now there was a bracelet. Now there was a voice. Tiana stayed home that day. She didn't need to stand on the Capitol steps again. The streets were already doing it for her. In Chicago, people marched with signs reading, "If they can erase her, they can erase us." In Atlanta, someone spray painted on the side of the courthouse, "Stamped in blood, sealed by law, seen at last." But in Washington, all eyes turned to one courtroom. The injunction hearing had been scheduled on an emergency calendar. Federal judge, no cameras, no press allowed inside. But the line outside wrapped 2 city blocks. People didn't want to see. They wanted to witness. Jasmine sat in the gallery, not called to speak, but present anyway. The red folder sat in her lap like a loaded truth no court could fully contain. Across from her, Trump's lawyers looked exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from fighting a truth too documented to deny and too viral to delete. When the judge finally spoke, it was not with fire, but with ice. This motion does not seek justice. It seeks concealment. The request to suppress congressional record and testimony is denied. No applause, no gasps, just gravity. The court transcript would later include the phrase, "Attempts to erase fact in the digital age often serve only to amplify it." Outside, when Jasmine exited the courthouse, a young man passed her a folded note. She opened it without stopping. It read, "Thank you for undeleting us." She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply placed the note into the folder. Because the folder no longer just held Tiana's truth. It held a nation's memory of every girl silenced, signed away, or sealed behind shame. And now no court could erase it. 1 year later, it wasn't a courtroom echoing the verdict. It was a stage. Tiana Meredith stood under golden lights at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, wearing a navy gown stitched with her grandmother's initials, holding a microphone she didn't tremble to touch. The room was full, not with senators or strategists, but with girls, black girls, brown girls, girls from foster care, girls whose names had never appeared on certificates they could hold in their own hands, girls who had watched her testimony a year earlier and realized, you can exist out loud. The scholarship was new, the plaque fresh, the name engraved on the award, the I Exist Fellowship. The moment Tiana stepped up to accept it, the crowd rose to their feet, not in ceremony but in recognition. She didn't wave, she didn't pose. She just waited until the applause softened, then said, "They once tried to seal me away in a folder. Today, they handed me a diploma." Laughter, then silence. But it wasn't the kind that tried to mute. It was the kind that listened. This scholarship is for every girl who was told to be quiet and every woman who refused. Meanwhile, in Washington, Jasmine Crockett wasn't in the audience. She was in the middle of a campaign rally, her Senate run in full swing. The slogan across her banner was short and final, "Truth doesn't go quiet." The polls had her leading. She no longer needed the red folder. It had been turned over to the Library of Congress. The amended birth certificate had become a federal record, requested more than any other in its archive that year. School textbooks quietly began footnoting the case under Modern Civil Rights Flashpoints, Twinlow. And the hush money, it had become a headline in history books. Trump, no longer on ballots, spent most of his time in litigation, not for tax returns or classified documents, but for what now bore its own name in the courts, the Meredith suppression scheme. But none of that mattered on the stage tonight, because the most important thing wasn't who lost power, it was who found voice. At first the ceremony, a young girl named Alani walked up to Tiana with a notebook in her hand. Her hair was braided in beads. Her shoes were too big. Her courage wasn't. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Tiana knelt. "Anything. Did you ever wish you'd stayed quiet?" The question landed like a whisper in a vault. Tiana looked at her for a long moment, then reached down, opened Alani's notebook and wrote, "They wanted me to. That's how I knew I couldn't." Later that night, Jasmine called. They didn't talk about the campaign or the hearings or even the legacy. They just sat on the phone for a minute. Two women, one fight, countless echoes. "Do you hear that?" Jasmine finally asked. "What?" Jasmine smiled into the quiet. "The silence," she said. It turned into thunder. In the end, America didn't deliver a verdict with a gavel. It delivered it with a microphone. And for the first time in 25 years, the girl they tried to erase became the woman they could not ignore. Stamped, spoken, seen. Truth does not vanish when ignored. It waits, buried beneath signatures, silence, and shame, until someone brave enough dares to dig. In a world that rewards the powerful for forgetting, sometimes the greatest act of resistance is simply to remember and to speak that memory aloud. Because no name deserves to be erased, and no justice is real until it includes the voices they paid not to hear. If this story lit something inside you, don't scroll. Sit with it, share it, say her name, like, comment, and send this to someone who still believes silence is safety. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where buried truths don't stay buried. Hit the bell, because the next story won't whisper, it will roar. and it just might rewire how you see legacy, shame, and justice. This is a fictional dramatization, unintentional, inspired by centuries of real silencing, and the fierce, flawed human courage it takes to break that silence. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental, or deliberate, as reflection and reckoning. Thanks for watching. They tried to erase her. You made sure they didn't. This is Harrison Stories.